was about 4 years ago, on New Year's Eve, when this happened. I was hosting a small party at my house to celebrate. At the time, I lived close to the city in a really busy neighborhood. My house was a two-bedroom, two-story place, and I'd only been living there for a few months. Most of the people I invited were friends from work. We all worked at a large company and were part of the same department. Initially, I planned to invite about 5 people, but word got around at the office, and more folks asked if they could come. I was fine with it. I thought, the more, the merrier. Everyone promised to bring something, food, drinks, snacks, so I figured it'd be fun. My house had more than enough space, so I spent time setting everything up to make it cozy and comfortable for everyone. People started arriving around 6 p.m. My best friend, Ben, was the first to show up. He helped me with a few last-minute things before others began to arrive. Soon, my coworkers started trickling in, and before I knew it, there were about 15 people at my house. We had snacks laid out on the table, music playing in the background, and we started playing a few games. The atmosphere was lively, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. It felt like the perfect way to celebrate the new year. At some point during the evening, I noticed a guy I didn't recognize. He was standing near the edge of the room, kind of keeping to himself. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed he came with someone, and since everyone seemed to be chatting and laughing, I let it slide. A little later, I noticed him talking to Rachel, one of my coworkers. They seemed to be having a pretty involved conversation, so I figured they must know each other. Still, something about him felt off. He wasn't as engaged as everyone else. He had this distant, almost detached look on his face. After a while, I saw the guy again. This time, he wasn't talking to anyone. He was standing alone in a corner, just watching people. It gave me an uneasy feeling. I decided to ask a few people if they knew who he was, but no one seemed to have a clue. That's when I started to get nervous. This was my house, and I had no idea who this guy was or how he got in. I thought maybe Rachel would know. I found her sitting in the dining room, talking to another coworker. I tapped her on the shoulder and asked about the guy she'd been talking to earlier. She frowned and said she didn't know him either. She added that he'd been acting a little weird around her and had told her he was an old friend of mine. That caught me off guard. I was sure I'd never seen this guy before in my life. Now I knew I had to do something. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I couldn't just let this stranger hang around. I decided to go back to the living room and talk to him. But when I got there, he wasn't in the corner anymore. My heart sank a little. I looked around the room but didn't see him anywhere. I started to feel a mix of relief and worry. Maybe he'd left. But why would he just leave without saying anything to anyone? I asked my friend Jake if he'd seen the guy leave. Jake shook his head and told me the guy had gone upstairs. That feeling of relief I had a second ago disappeared instantly. There was no reason for anyone to go upstairs, because the whole party was happening downstairs. My stomach twisted into a knot. What was this guy doing up there? I found Ben and told him about the situation. He agreed to go upstairs with me to check things out. We walked up the staircase together, our footsteps feeling loud in the quiet. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit, with just a bit of light spilling in from the bottom of the stairs. There were 3 doors, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. As we reached the top of the stairs, we both noticed the door to the spare bedroom slowly closing. My heart was racing now. I walked up to the door and knocked firmly. "Hey, who's in there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no answer. Ben and I exchanged a look. I knocked again, harder this time. "You need to come out right now," I said. But the room stayed silent. We waited for what felt like forever, but it was probably just a couple of minutes. Still, there was no response. I didn't want to just barge in. What if he had a weapon or something? I whispered to Ben that maybe we should go back downstairs and call the police. He nodded, and we quietly backed away from the door. When we got back downstairs, the party was still going strong, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the stairs, half expecting the guy to come down. By now, it was almost midnight, and people were starting to get ready for the countdown. I decided I'd give it a little more time. If he didn't leave on his own, I'd call the cops. Midnight came and went. People started trickling out, saying their goodbyes and wishing us a happy new year. By the time the last guest left, it was just me, Ben, and the mystery guy. I was on edge, knowing he was still somewhere in the house. Ben and I decided to go back upstairs and check again. We crept up the stairs, moving as quietly as we could. The hallway was just as dark and silent as before. This time, the spare bedroom door was open. My stomach dropped. We checked the room, but it was empty. Then we checked the bathroom. Nothing. That left my bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, my hands shaking. The room was empty. Ben and I were standing there, trying to figure out what to do next, when we heard the faint sound of footsteps behind us. We both spun around just in time to catch a glimpse of the guy heading down the stairs. He moved quickly, not even looking back at us. We bolted after him, but by the time we got to the bottom of the stairs, the front door was already swinging shut. Ben and I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, our hearts pounding. He was gone. Just like that. We locked the door and checked all the windows to make sure everything was secure. Then we searched the entire house again, just to be sure he wasn't hiding somewhere else. We didn't find anything missing. Not a single thing was out of place. That was almost the strangest part of it all. If he wasn't here to steal anything, then what did he want? Even now, years later, I still think about that night. Who was he? How did he get into my house? And what were his intentions? The fact that he didn't take anything makes me wonder if he was there to hurt someone. I'll probably never know the answers, but it's something that'll always stay with me. That uneasy feeling of knowing someone was in your home, uninvited, and you have no idea why. That feeling doesn't ever really go away. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open. A few years ago, on New Year's Eve, I was about 20 years old. I had always been the type of person who preferred quiet nights at home, spending time with my family. I never really liked the whole party scene. I always thought about how short life was, and how important it was to cherish the moments we had with the people we loved. My parents weren't going to be around forever, and I made sure to make the most of the time I had with them. I didn't mind staying in and keeping to myself, but this year, one of my friends was not going to let me get away with it. His name was Matt. I had known him since high school, and we'd been pretty good friends back then. However, after I moved away for college, we lost touch for a while. We had kept in contact off and on, but it wasn't the same. Matt was the type of person who loved to throw huge parties, and that's exactly what he was planning for New Year's Eve. His parents were going to be out of town that week in New York, and he had decided that this would be the perfect opportunity to throw the biggest party of the year. He kept asking me to come, and for weeks I told him no. I wasn't interested. I wasn't a party person, and I didn't really feel the need to go out and get drunk with a bunch of strangers. But after a lot of back and forth and a little bit of pressure, I finally agreed. I figured it would be good to catch up with Matt, and after all, it had been a couple of years since we had seen each other. It wasn't like I had any other plans, so I decided to give it a shot. I'd been stuck in my own little bubble for too long, and maybe it was time to get out and do something different. I arrived at his house a little after 8 p.m. The place was huge. His parents had a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, and it looked like he had invited just about everyone he knew. When I stepped inside, it was like walking into a completely different world. The music was loud, the lights were bright, and people were everywhere. There was a crowd of people in the living room, and others were dancing and mingling outside. The whole house was alive with energy, and for a moment, I stood there, feeling a little out of place. I didn't know anyone here except Matt, and that made me a little nervous. But as the night went on, I started to loosen up a bit. I grabbed a beer and wandered around the house, trying to get used to the atmosphere. The party was big, but it was still fun to see Matt again after all this time. He introduced me to a few people, and we talked about everything from school to our plans for the future. It was nice to catch up, and for a moment I was starting to enjoy myself. The crowd didn't seem so overwhelming anymore, and I even started dancing with a few of the girls Matt had introduced me to. By 9 p.m., the house was packed. There were easily around 100 people there. The DJ was playing upbeat music and people were dancing, drinking, and celebrating. Matt was busy running around, making sure everything was going smoothly. He had a whole crew of friends helping him, and it was clear that he was really into hosting. I wasn't much of a dancer, but I found myself tapping my foot to the beat and talking to a few more people as the night went on. As the evening continued, I started to feel more comfortable. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and the party was in full swing. There was laughter everywhere, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. Matt kept trying to get me to talk to more girls, but I wasn't really into the idea. I wasn't shy, but I wasn't a big flirt either. I was just there to have a good time and catch up with Matt. At one point, I went inside the house to grab another beer. I was standing by the snack table, scanning the room for Matt, when I noticed a man standing alone by the bar. He was older, probably in his mid-40s, tall with glasses, and dressed in a plain shirt and jeans. There was something about him that didn't quite fit in with the rest of the partygoers. He didn't look like he was there to have a good time. His presence felt out of place. I glanced at him for a second, and then, to my surprise, he looked right back at me. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and something about it felt strange. I couldn't explain why, but the way he looked at me made me feel uneasy. Then, without warning, the man started to walk over to me. He had this calm, almost too composed expression on his face as he approached me. He didn't seem like he was in a hurry, but there was a certain purpose in his step. When he reached me, he introduced himself. "Hey, I'm Nate," he said, offering his hand. Nice to meet you," I replied, a little unsure of what to say. His handshake was firm, but it didn't feel warm. It felt forced, like he was trying too hard to be friendly. We exchanged pleasantries, and for a moment, it seemed like a normal conversation. He asked if I was enjoying the party, and I told him that I was. But then, out of nowhere, he started asking me more personal questions. "So, what do you do?" he asked, his tone casual, but it felt too probing for someone I had just met. I told him a little about myself, but the conversation started to feel weird. He didn't seem interested in what I had to say. Instead, he asked more questions, ones that didn't seem to have much to do with the party or the people around us. It was as though he was trying to get under my skin. I wasn't sure what he was after, but the conversation was starting to feel uncomfortable. There was a long pause, and I felt the weight of the silence. It was like the conversation had hit a dead end. I looked around the room, trying to find an excuse to walk away. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Nate," I said, forcing a smile. I turned to walk away, but then, as I looked back at him, I saw it. He was staring at me. Not a casual glance, but a long, unblinking stare. His face was expressionless, almost too still. The way he was looking at me made my skin crawl. I didn't know what it was, but something about his stare felt unsettling. I quickly turned away, trying to shake off the feeling that had crept up on me. The rest of the night went on like any other party. People were still dancing, laughing, and celebrating the new year. I didn't see Nate again, and I tried to push the weird encounter out of my mind. I had a good time with the people I knew, but that moment with Nate kept bugging me. It was like something didn't sit right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Eventually, it was time for the countdown to the new year. The whole party gathered outside in the backyard, waiting for the clock to strike midnight. Fireworks lit up the sky, and everyone cheered as the new year began. We all raised our glasses and wished each other a happy new year. The moment was filled with excitement, but then something happened that would change the tone of the night entirely. As we watched the fireworks, a loud scream suddenly pierced the air. It was a woman's scream, one that sounded absolutely terrified. Everyone froze for a moment, and then we all turned to the house. The scream had come from inside. My heart raced, and I felt a chill run down my spine. What the hell had happened? Matt and a couple of other guys immediately ran into the house, heading toward the stairs where the scream had come from. I followed behind, my mind racing. What was going on? Was someone hurt? My legs felt like lead as I moved through the crowd and up the stairs, trying to make sense of what was happening. When we reached the top of the stairs, we found a girl standing in the hallway, shaking with fear. She was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "What happened?" Matt asked, his voice frantic. She could barely speak at first, but then she managed to get the words out. "I was in the bathroom," she said, her voice shaking, "and I saw an eye. There was an eye looking at me from the closet." She started to cry, her body trembling. The realization hit us all like a ton of bricks. Someone had been hiding in the bathroom closet. A stranger. Matt immediately called the police, and we waited for them to arrive. The whole house was on edge, everyone nervous and unsure of what was going on. The girl who had seen the eye was still in shock, but we did our best to comfort her and make her feel safe. The police arrived shortly after, and they immediately began searching the house. When they questioned the man, Nate, he didn't resist. He admitted to everything. He had just walked into the house like he was part of the crowd, and no one had noticed him. He had hidden in the bathroom closet, waiting for an opportunity to do who knows what. The police later found out that Nate was wanted for multiple assaults, including one on his ex-wife. The details of his past were chilling, and it made the whole situation even more terrifying. He had been at the party the entire time, just walking around like he belonged, and we had no idea who he was or what he was capable of. The rest of the night was a blur. We all tried to get back to the party, but the mood had completely shifted. The fun and excitement of the new year had been replaced by an overwhelming sense of fear. No one felt safe. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the bathroom and what could have happened if she hadn't screamed. In the days that followed, we learned that Nate had been arrested and charged with several crimes. Thankfully, nothing worse had happened, but the thought of what could have been haunted me. I couldn't shake the image of that cold, emotionless stare he had given me earlier in the night. Years have passed since that New Year's Eve, but I still think about that night. I have a girlfriend now, and I'm much more cautious about the people I let into my life. That night taught me to always be aware of my surroundings, to never let my guard down, and to trust my instincts. The world can be unpredictable, and you never know what might be lurking in the shadows. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. This story happened on New Year's Eve of 2016. I was living in Iowa at the time, and anyone from around here knows how bitterly cold the winters can get at night. The snow outside had turned everything quiet and still. When it snows like that, the world seems almost frozen in time, and every little noise stands out. That night, my best friend Colton and I were hanging out in my family's walkout basement. We didn't have much planned, just a boring New Year's Eve spent playing video games. My mom had gone out to a bar right after work to have a few drinks with her coworkers, so we were completely alone in the house. At some point during the night, Colton and I decided it might be fun to sneak into the family's wine cabinet and grab a bottle to celebrate the new year. We didn't think much of it. It just seemed like a harmless way to pass the time. As we sat there opening up the first bottle, laughing quietly about how we'd need to put everything back exactly as it was so my mom wouldn't notice, I suddenly heard the sound of the garage door opening and then slamming shut. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe my mom had come home early, and my first instinct was to hide the bottle. My heart was racing as I looked around for a good spot to stash it. That's when I heard heavy footsteps, deliberate and loud, moving from the garage toward the stairs. Then I heard my mom's voice call my name. "Hey, can you come help me with something?" she said, her voice echoing down the stairs. At first, I felt a wave of relief. It had to be her, right? But something about the situation still felt off. I yelled back, "I'll be there in a minute," and listened for her reply, but there was nothing. Just silence. A minute passed and I heard her call out again. This time her voice sounded different. It was her voice. I was sure of that. But it didn't feel right. There was something off about it, something I couldn't quite explain. It was almost like her tone was missing some kind of warmth, like it was flat or hollow. Then she asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Is anyone down there with you?" That question hit me hard because it didn't make sense. My family never cared if I had friends over. Our house was always open to anyone, and my mom had never once been bothered by Colton being around. The way she asked it, though, felt wrong, like she was suspicious or something else entirely. I turned to Colton, who was already looking uneasy, and whispered, "Something's not right." Still, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe she was just tired from work or something. So I yelled back up, "It's just me and Colton." As soon as I said that, though, I regretted it. The second the words left my mouth, a heavy silence fell over the house. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. After a few moments of stillness, I decided I needed to go upstairs and see what was going on. I told Colton to stay put and started climbing the stairs. As I reached the top, I realized the house was completely dark. Not a single light was on. That wasn't like my mom at all. She always turned on the kitchen light or the living room lamp when she got home. I called out, "Mom," but there was no reply. The only light came from the dim glow of the snow outside, barely illuminating the kitchen windows. I stepped into the kitchen, my footsteps sounding way too loud in the silence. I called her name again, louder this time, but still, nothing. My uneasiness was growing. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. To my surprise, she picked up immediately. "Hey, where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm still at the bar," she said. "What's wrong?" Her answer made my blood run cold. If she was still at the bar, then who the hell was in the house? I quickly explained what had happened, and her voice turned serious. "Listen to me," she said. "Go back downstairs. Lock the basement door. Stay there? I'll be home in 5 minutes." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. When I got to the basement, I locked the door and told Colton everything. He looked as scared as I felt, but we didn't have much time to think. A few minutes later, we started hearing noises upstairs. It wasn't footsteps exactly, but we could hear movement. The kind of movement that lets you know someone's there, even if you can't see or hear them clearly. It felt like the house wasn't empty anymore. Colton and I sat there in silence, barely daring to breathe. Every now and then, we'd hear a faint creak or a rustle, like something shifting around above us. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to let us know we weren't alone. My mom had said she'd be home in 5 minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. Finally, after what felt like forever, we heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. Almost instantly, the feeling in the house changed. Whatever had been upstairs, whatever had been making those noises, it was gone, just like that. The second her car arrived, the oppressive, heavy presence vanished. When my mom came inside, I ran up to meet her, talking so fast I could barely get the words out. She took one look at me and Colton and knew we weren't making it up. We all went upstairs together, and even though everything seemed normal at first, we could all feel that something wasn't right. The house felt off, like it was holding its breath. We checked every room, every corner, but we didn't find anything. No open windows, no unlocked doors, nothing out of place. It was as if whatever had been there had vanished without a trace. My mom tried to reassure us, but I could tell she was shaken too. She told us it was probably nothing, maybe just our imaginations running wild, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe it any more than we did. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the voice. It had sounded so much like my mom, but at the same time, it hadn't. It was like something was trying to mimic her but didn't quite know how to do it perfectly. And then there was the feeling in the house, that overwhelming sense of being watched, of not being alone. It still gives me chills just thinking about it. I never found out what happened that night. My mom passed away a few years later, and I've since moved to Arizona, but every New Year's Eve, I think about that night. I think about the voice that called my name and asked me to come upstairs. Whatever it wasn't human. I don't know how I know that, but I do. And every time I remember that night, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had gone upstairs a little sooner or if my mom hadn't answered the phone. Some questions, I guess, are better left unanswered. Hey everyone, I'm curious to know more about you all. Drop a comment below and let me know which country you're watching from. I love seeing how far our community reaches, so don't be shy. I'll be reading through the comments.